I did in the end, yeah. You know, I have a choice. 20 years ago. That's all I've got. Take a little while to get through it. And also, if you go on posting, you want to see what they challenge yeah, that's what I end up doing. Yeah, I mean, now that's something very well. I spoke to him earlier. I spoke to him earlier and said, take the time, everyone, just go for everyone.
Across the road in the bottom belt.
You take one person.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Today, Reform UK will unveil our 5-point plan to save our British pubs. Now, we always say in Reform, you'll hear Nigel say it many times, that every pub is a parliament. But that parliament over there is a little bit different because that still allows a Prime Minister in, and we're going to put a stop to that over the next few years. A pub is not just a place that sells beer. My local pub is a pub called the Dog House in Kirkby in Ashfield. And that pub every single weekend is full of England managers, it's full of politicians, it's full of doctors, rocket scientists, and it's a place full of experts on everything. But of course they're not experts, they're just people with an opinion. I even have a friend who sits in the pub every Sunday. He tells tall stories. He drinks loads of beer, he makes us laugh, and we go out with our ribs aching, and it's absolutely brilliant. At one stage, he was telling 4 lies a minute. He should be a politician. My local pub is also a place where people can go and seek comfort if something traumatic has happened in their life, because our pubs are full of counsellors as well, not trained psychiatrists or counsellors, but just genuine people, salt of the earth people who are always there to lend a helping ear or a helping hand and listen to you and provide that extra support. And pubs in our country raise over £100 million a year for charities. That equates to £1.4 billion over 10 years. And our pub goers are being hammered by the Exchequer with taxes on the pints they drink. But at the same time, they are raising hundreds of millions of pounds for our charities. In fact, pubs are a place where people from all walks of life can go, express their opinions on whatever subject they wish, whilst having a few drinks. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, you can walk into most pubs in our country, have a few pints, have a conversation with friends or strangers, and then strangers might become friends. Now, I'm old enough to remember having a best side and a tap room in our pubs. I don't know what you call them down here, we call them best sides and tap room. The best side would be for married couples, courting couples, the like, and the tap room would be a place where the miners and retired miners would have a few pints. They'd smoke, they'd argue, they'd play darts and use some colourful language from time to time, and there might be the odd bit of a disagreement, but it is what it is, or it was what it was. There'd be a bloke sat in the corner with his big book taking bets, watching the TV, the horse racing. And you might have seen a couple of pheasants or a couple of dead rabbits on the table. That's what the pubs was like. Pubs were a place where we went after a hard week at work to unwind and socialise. And on a Sunday you might even play football for your local football team. Now, it might not sound like much to the Prosecco drinkers in Westminster, but our pub culture has helped shape our country over many years, if not centuries. Where else in the world would you go to a pub to celebrate a birthday, a wedding, a birth, and then attend a wake in the same room? It's the same pub, it's the same people, it's the same drinks. Our breweries all over the country employed thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. In Nottinghamshire we had Mansfield Brewery, Home Ales, Kimberley Ales and Shipston's, all within 10 miles of each other. They're all gone, along with tens of thousands of jobs, after what successive governments have done to them. Pubs are one of the great British traditions. Wherever you go in the world, there are British pubs. You might go to America or Singapore, wherever, there'll be a red line there. And these are packed to the rafters with expats and locals who love the feel of a great British pub. Reform UK will stop the rot, not just for pubs, but for the whole hospitality sector as well. The 5-point plan. I want to go through it briefly. Number 1, reduce VAT to 10% for the hospitality sector. This is something that every single landlord I speak to asks for. This will create a much fairer playing field between hospitality and the supermarkets. Number 2, scrap the employer national insurance increase for hospitality businesses. Rachel Reeves's budget in the autumn of 2024 added £1 billion to the costs of our hospitality industry, and it's made it much more difficult for young people to get into work. And when you consider for a lot of young people, a pub is their first job. Number 3 is simple, cut beer duty by 10%. Number 4, staggered business rates abolition for all pubs over a 4-year period and prioritising venues in most need. Business rates are killing our hospitality industry. When a pub closes, it stays closed. You hardly ever see them reopen. You might drive by a year later and that pub you used to go in is now a supermarket or houses or a HMO. But the pub has gone forever, which leads me on to the next point, the 5th and final point. We have to change regulation, the beer orders, which was introduced in the 1990s. Goodness knows why, because it tied landlords into long-term contracts, and now they can barely scrape a living. As of 2024, the UK had 47,000 pubs, and half of these were owned by chains. Reform UK want to see more independent pubs, where landlords are allowed to buy their beer from wherever they want. A perfect example of this is in Ashfield. We have a pub called the New Cross. It would be safe to say, it was a pub that was struggling in a town centre. Sales were down, and the brewery, or the chain, put it up for sale. It was up for sale for over a year. Nobody wanted it, until a colleague of mine decided he wanted to buy it. But he didn't want to buy it to be a pub. He wanted to buy it to turn it into a supermarket, a mini market. So he bought the pub. When the regulars had found out he'd bought the pub, they went to see him and they said, please keep it open as a pub, this is our pub. Bearing in mind he bought it as a mini market, he said to the regulars, okay, I will keep it open for a year and see how it goes. It was his pub. It was now a free house. He could buy the beer from where he wanted. And he found that by shopping around, he could buy the beer relatively cheap, sell it for £3 a pint and still make a decent profit. That 10 years later, that pub is still thriving. He's employing people, the pub's still going, he's making a good living. He's made such a good living, he's been down the road and got another pub, one that was shut for over a year, had the boards up, and he's done the same there. And that pub is thriving as well. So it just goes to show that if landlords can trade on a level playing field, then they can make a success. Now, people will ask, how are we going to pay for all this? It's a £3 billion package. And we will pay for it by lifting the 2-child limit for children where parents are British and work full-time. The maths have been done. Zero and his policy team have done the maths. It all stacks up. We owe it to our hospitality industry to do the right thing, to make sure they can go on trading, to make sure that every pub is still a parliament. And I want to lead you on to somebody now who's going to speak a little bit more on this subject. It's a man who would probably describe himself as a moderate to light drinker. He's the is the leader of Reform UK, and that's Nigel Farage. Nigel. I'll sit down there, Nigel.
Very kind of you, Lee. Very kind of you. Good afternoon, everybody. I have for over 25 years in Who's Who, under hobbies and recreations, listed proper pubs. So I think this is a subject about which I can speak with some degree of knowledge. The pub does matter, and every pub's a parliament is a phrase that I came up with 25 years ago. Amazing how in a pub you can have a firm opinion, and someone says, well, hang on a second, have you looked at it like this? And you might change your view by 180 degrees. What is happening to our pubs, what is happening to our hospitality sector is little short of a disaster. They're on the edge of falling off a cliff. It's serious. It's very, very serious. And it isn't just the Reeves budgets. Of course, this does go back to swinging increases in beer duty that happened especially in Jeremy Hunt's time. Yes, there are cultural changes. Yes, there are fewer young people drinking alcohol regularly. But they're drinking other brands. They're drinking low alcohol. They're drinking zero alcohol. And there is little doubt that certainly in small town, small village Britain, when pubs close, it is a social disaster for the community. So we've tried here to put forward some quite sensible proposals. If you just think about it, VAT going down to 10%, allied to a 10% cut in beer duty, would be 44p of a pint of beer before you even begin. Average price probably of a pint of beer at the moment, around about £4.80. But actually we go further with this, with changes to regulation, with the gradual phasing out of business rates. I would think within 2 to 3 years these measures would take £1 off every pint, which does at least begin to bring back some degree of competitiveness against the supermarkets. But the other killer for pubs, of course, given that many are pretty drafty old buildings, is energy bills. Energy bills have closed as many pubs in the last 5 years as any other factor. And the net zero lunacy that we were taken down by the Conservatives and now being followed by a level of fanaticism, I think is the only way I can possibly describe Miliband's feelings towards the subject, is something else that a reform government, by getting rid of all of the artificial subsidies, would yet further help our pubs and indeed our broader hospitality sector. The national insurance increases. We're now told that the Chancellor, despite her 10 years as a very senior economist at the Bank of England, didn't understand what the knock-on effects would be. And certainly bringing down the national insurance level to £5,000 a year has put paid to tens of thousands of young people getting those part-time jobs they want when they're students at university or younger than that. So this is a constructive, costed plan. Yes, it means getting rid of the proposed legislation from the Labour government on the two-child cap. It is reducing the benefits bill in favour of encouraging private enterprise and jobs and wealth creation. And that, I think, is perhaps a snapshot of what you'll see more broadly in terms of economic policy coming out of reform over the course of the next months and years. The public sector, the welfare bill, cannot go on rising unless we start to create more wealth. This plan already has been welcomed by some quite senior figures in the pub. And don't forget the brewing industry. Dozens of small breweries closed around the United Kingdom last year. And if we can keep more pubs open, it will be a social good for the United Kingdom. Now, I've got a list of questions here. I suspect that pubs won't be the only item on the agenda today. I could be wrong, of course. Let's start with Ben Wright from the BBC.
Thank you.
Is there a microphone? There is.
Sorry, Thank you very much, Mr. Farage. Yes, on the story of the day, Lord Mandelson, government say that they want to introduce legislation to strip him of his title, to remove him from the Lords. What do you think about that? Will reforms support it? And moves more broadly to remove miscreant peers from the House of Lords? Secondly, why should taxpayers subsidise failing pubs because people are drinking less?
Well, it wouldn't be taxpayers subsidising it directly, would it? I mean, reducing taxation is not a subsidy. Tax is a tax. What we're doing is reducing the welfare bill in order to create private enterprise, jobs, wealth creation, people paying more tax, let alone the social benefits from it. As I understand it, the last time that titles were removed by Act of Parliament was around about the time of the First World War, when there were some supporting the other side. To me, getting rid of his title as Lord and one or two other miscreant peers, fine. But it's not the issue of the day. It absolutely is not the issue of the day. The issue of the day is that not only did this man breach cabinet confidentiality, but he leaked highly market-sensitive information. Let me tell you, when I was in the European Parliament and I was talking about the bond spreads, the width of bond spreads between Greece, Italy and Germany, when those bailouts happened, there was a massive, immediate market shift. I watched it. It was huge. Anybody that had that information, that had access to money and funds of the kind that Epstein did, well, if he made tens of millions out of it, he was lax. Because there was a chance to make hundreds of millions out of that trade. So quick was the shift in the bond spreads. That, it seems to me, must be bordering on criminal. There is no direct insider trading law for bonds in quite the same way that there is for stocks, and that's been the case since 1981, the Insider Trading Act. But it is highly sensitive market information. It is government secrets. I also wonder whether, in emails to Epstein, he talked about the security apparatus that exists underneath Number 10 and at the heart of Whitehall. That is information that is of national security importance. And so I think there is reason to ask the question whether Mandelson has not broken the Official Secrets Act. And I'd like to know whether Lord Hermer will be happy and satisfied for a prosecution to proceed on that basis. I think it's that serious. So, fine, talk about removing the title, but that really is, I think, a very small part of something that is much bigger, much more serious. And I'm not even sure that we know the full story yet. By the way, my name was mentioned 37 times in the files, but just to repeat, I never met Epstein and I didn't go to the island. OK, let's go on to Catherine Forster, GB News.
Thank you. Catherine Forster, GB News. On Mandelson, again, the Prime Minister says that he has let his country down. How would you describe all of the behaviour that he's taken part in that we now know of? And the actions that the Prime Minister is now taking, are they going to be sufficient for getting him and Number 10 out of trouble on this?
No, I don't think they are. I mean, look, the warnings were there, weren't they? The warnings were there. We go back to the mortgage. We go back to the Hinduja passport application. We go back at a time when he was Trade Minister and when the only part of the world that charged tariffs on base metals were the European Union, with its 7% import tax on aluminium coming, in this case, out of Russia. And there he is on Deripaska's yacht, shortly before the tariffs change. I mean, how many more warnings? How many more warnings did the Prime Minister, or indeed Morgan McSweeney, need? They have made a grave, grave error of judgment, despite repeated warnings. This all comes at a time when you've got a Labour MP who's been sentenced to another 4 years in prison by a foreign court, a Labour MP arrested again and charged on some incredibly serious crimes. And, in politics, you will always get the odd bad apple in a political party. But it would appear that in the case right now of this Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff, their errors of judgment, partly their errors of judgment, have led now to case after case after case. Difficult for somebody who was already the most unpopular Prime Minister in living memory, this deals yet a further blow. And so I still stick to the view that after May the 7th, when you see in Wales, for example, Labour that's dominated the place going right back to Keir Hardie's time, very difficult for me to think that Starmer will survive the summer if he even gets through to May the 7th. Alexander Rogers from Sky News.
Nigel Farage, if you were Keir Starmer dealing with these latest revelations from Peter Mandelson, who would you blame for his appointment? And should someone lose their job over this, and if so, who?
Well, it's always the bloke at the top in the end that has to take responsibility, even if it's not his or her fault. I mean, that's just the way it works in business, in politics. I mean, obviously we don't know what the MI6 report that the Prime Minister received, or did he receive, did he ask for it before the appointment as ambassador to America. We don't know the details of that. But ultimately, I would have thought that the Labour backbenchers, who are moving quite rapidly to the left in terms of their centre of gravity, will be demanding that McSweeney goes within the next few days. Perhaps it'll take a week. And you'll know, as soon as McSweeney goes, that Starmer won't last long afterwards. That would be my take and my judgment. Ultimately, given, as I said a moment ago, all the previous warnings about Mandelson's behaviour, it is a grave error of judgment on behalf of the Prime Minister. And I think that's inescapable now. OK, let's move on to Francis Reid, Channel 4.
Thank you. Francis Reid, Channel 4 News. Mr Farage, in an email exchange in the latest Epstein files, Steve Bannon reveals that he is an advisor to the AFD, Orban, Salvini and you. Do you think that's an accurate description of your relationship with him? That's the first question. And secondly, the government has said there's a broader need for the House of Lords to be able to swiftly remove transgressors. What does that look like under you? What would you do about it?
Yeah, look, clearly it's very outdated that we have to go back to the First World War to see the time that this particular piece of legislation was enacted. There ought to be a swifter, easier, quicker way to remove peers of their title if they've been found guilty and sent to prison, for argument's sake. So, yeah, constitutionally, perhaps something needs to change, but I repeat the point. I don't think it's the main issue of the day. Whether someone's called Lord this or not doesn't, frankly, compared to the gravity of what we're talking about, I don't think it really matters. I've known Steve Bannon since 2012 or 13, I can't remember. Probably 2012, I think, and he attended an event I spoke at in East Anglia. I've met him many times since, including when he was in the West Wing, in the first Trump, briefly in the West Wing, in the first Trump term. I know Steve, I listen to Steve, I agree with Steve sometimes, I disagree fundamentally with Steve at other times. I always listen to what he says, as indeed does a lot of the Conservative movement. But this period in 2018 was he sort of saw himself as the granddaddy of the populist wave across Europe. But we've never had any formal engagement or relationship of any kind. I mean, frankly, somebody I meet in a pub, let's bring it back to pubs, shall we? Someone I meet in a pub can give me a suggestion and go say that they've acted as an advisor to me. So I wouldn't take it any more seriously than that. But, he's not somebody, whether you like him or not, he's not someone to be underestimated. Let us go to Rhys Williams, ITV News.
Mr Farage, you offered to work with Peter Mandelson when he was made US ambassador to try to get a good trade deal with the US, despite all of the suspicions that you had. Does that say anything about your judgment?
Well, he wasn't my choice of ambassador. I thought there was somebody eminently more qualified to be ambassador. Somebody who could have walked through the door of the Oval Office, having a personal relationship with the President. Not just the President, but indeed over half the Cabinet, who were personal friends. And I thought that person would have been far more suitable in terms of negotiating good deals for us on trade, but perhaps also pushing back on elements of foreign policy that America was uttering that we were not in agreement with, be that Canada or whatever else it may be. I suspect if that person had been there, we wouldn't have seen the Chagos surrender, which of course will be the next big U-turn. That person, who's well known to me, wasn't chosen, which I think is a great shame, personally. He was there. Starmer was in number 10. I didn't like that either. But I did say to the Prime Minister, you know, if I can help you with anything, with the relationship with Trump or any of the administration, I will do so, because it's in the national interest. And that's what I said at the time, and I meant it sincerely. Thank you. Let's go on. Tim Stanley from the Daily T.
Hi, hello. Nigel, our readers will be delighted by everything you've said about pubs this afternoon. Thank you so much, because we've been running the Save Our Pubs campaign. It's great stuff, but I'm going to have to ask you about Mandy. I'm sorry.
I thought it was all about pubs today. It's so disappointing. It really is.
First question, picking up on what you said about all the warnings were there with Mandelson. You know, he'd been in government twice before and sacked, still hired by Gordon Brown, still then hired by Keir Starmer. How do you account for Peter Mandelson constantly returning to Labour and working for it? How can you explain the strange appeal of this man? And second question, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has just been reported to the police for alleged sex trafficking. Do you think that's an appropriate course of action?
I think for the royal family, what started off as an embarrassment is rapidly turning into a disaster. And perhaps it's the biggest scandal to engulf the royals since 1936. Very, very serious. Look, you know, the only answer I can give you to your specific question is, if that is if there is a genuine justification for making that complaint and it's not vexatious, there is no reason why his treatment by the law should not be exactly the same as all the rest of us. And I think the country would agree with that absolutely overwhelmingly. But yes, I mean, the King has acted relatively quickly on all of this, and thank goodness, frankly, that he did. As to whether much more is going to come out, I mean, just who knows? Mandelson, what's the appeal? You know, how is it that he sort of says, look into my eyes, I want to be back in the cabinet, I want to be ambassador? He's very articulate, he's highly intelligent, he's incredibly well briefed, probably the best networker in Westminster in the last 30 years. There isn't a telephone number of note that somehow isn't on Mandy's list, and I think he's able, when he talks to people, to give them the impression that he knows more about what's happening in the world, more about any particular subject than perhaps anybody else they can appoint. So, and the funny thing is, it's not all a con job. It's not all bull. He genuinely is incredibly well briefed. I mean, I watched him as Trade Commissioner, and yes, he was on Deripaska's yacht, but the actual subject, the brief, even at his hearing, I'd never heard anybody as impressive in all my 20 years in the European Parliament. You know, the guy is very, very bright, but clearly has a taste for money and has a taste for bad company. So, yeah, there is this sort of almost bewitching appeal. But, you know, you can forgive a friend, you can forgive a family member, you can forgive a party colleague one big mistake in their lives, and we all do it. And actually, in the spirit of Christian forgiveness, we should do it. But if we start trusting repeat offenders, they're not the idiots we are. Thank you. Let us move on to Christian, Calgary Express.
Hello. So I think you might be right about the frothy issue of the peerage, but on the issue of Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeney's judgment, we believe that tomorrow the Conservatives will use an opposition day motion to try and force the government to publish any vetting and advice that they gathered. Some Labour MPs reportedly thinking of backing that motion. Would you and your MPs look at backing that motion? And on the issue of pubs, would you say that morally a reform government would be almost sort of pro-booze in a way that other governments have failed to be?
That's a very tough question for me to defend, isn't it, really? Although Lee did introduce me as a moderate to light drinker. It's all about definitions, I suppose, isn't it? Although I think the World Health Organization now say that the safe alcohol limit is 0. which is yet another reason for leaving the WHO as quickly as we possibly can. I think that would be a very, very good idea. Look, it's nice to know that the Conservative Party is still capable of the odd good idea. So I think we probably is. I think we would support that. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned this earlier on. What was the advice? What did come back from MI6 or whoever it was? Was the job done properly? Did they just decide to rush it through? I mean, clearly Morgan McSweeney is very, very much as tied into this as the Prime Minister. Hence my speculation that if more and more comes out and it gets worse and worse, Starmer will make McSweeney the sacrificial lamb, which in the end will seal his own fate as well. Lucky Andy Burnham's not standing in the by-election, isn't it? OK, we've got some more questions. We've got Claire Ellicott from the Daily Mail.
Thank you. Should Lord Mandelson and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor be made to testify before Congress?
Well, they can't be forced to, is the first point. The second point is, when you testify before Congress, it's real. I did it back in the autumn over the free speech issue, and you're there, and your hand is on the Bible or whatever particular book you choose, and you swear it. I mean, you are effectively in a courtroom. I'd love to see the Palace of Westminster and our committees turn back into being that, because that building does have the ability to turn itself into a court. We get much more scrutiny of government ministers and government decisions if we did that. We can't force them to go, but I think in the case of Andrew, if he doesn't go, he'll probably never be able to show his face in public again. It's probably the only chance he's got, to some degree, at least I think, to clear his name, unless there are things that happen that we don't know about and that are incredibly grave. But if Andrew believes that, his judgment was flawed, he did things he shouldn't have done, but they weren't coercive, they weren't outside the law, if he believes those things, then he ought to go for his own sake and testify. Otherwise, he's going to be stuck at Marsh Farm, or probably more likely living in the Middle East, never to be seen again. So I think, from his perspective, he absolutely should do it. I don't really see Lord Mandelson volunteering for it somehow. Martina Bett from The Sun.
Thank you, Nigel. I wanted to ask you about the plan that you've announced today. Your numbers rely on getting 2/3 billion from the two-child limit, but that saving only works if every family behaves exactly the way you want them to behave. So what evidence have you got that this will actually produce any savings? And secondly, your flagship Doge unit at Kent County Council, designed to uncover waste, has failed to uncover any major savings. Are you still committed to a Doge unit if in government, and confident that it will, will show all the savings that you promised?
So the removal of the two-child cap, which will go in the majority to unemployed people, which will go in large part to foreign-born nationals. This is money that we are about to give, and by not giving it, we save it. Do you see what I mean? It's not as if we have to claw it back. We're just not going to, we just wouldn't give it in the first place. On Kent County Council, I think, frankly, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Never before in the history of British politics have county councils received so much scrutiny or so many questions during PMQs. Remarkable that 2 Kent Labour MPs managed to ask 6 PMQs in the space of 2 months. I don't know what the mathematical odds of a backbencher, 2 backbenchers from one county coming out are, but they are tens of thousands to 1. Kent County Council has made cost savings already of just over £100 million and has earmarked savings over the course of the next few years for several hundred million other. Did we inherit a massive debt trap? Does Kent have to take all the so-called under-18s that come across the English Channel and put them up at their own cost? Yes. Are finances difficult? Yes. But have we kept council tax rises to inflation or below across nearly all of the councils that we run? The answer is yes. Our council tax rises are less than the authorities that are controlled by the other parties. And we have made savings of £100 million in Kent. And if the Financial Times choose not to report that this morning, then frankly they are just plain wrong. OK, let's go to Peter Schnapwagers. Is that the right pronunciation? No? Help me, tell me.
More snapbangers, but hopefully...
OK, fine,
hopefully
snapbangers.
many opportunities
I won't get
to...
it wrong again, I absolutely promise you. Or I'll buy you a fine,
Perfect.
I promise. All right?
My question's back on pubs, which should be good news for you. You mentioned there that in small village Britain, it's a social disaster for the community, the loss of pubs. And so would reform therefore abolish Labour's plans to cut the drink driving limit, by which even having one drink could send you over the limit?
Yeah, I mean, in so many villages that I can think of in England, the post office has gone, sort of post office general store's gone, the pub's gone, the church has got a Marxist vicar. No, I'm joking. You know, well, actually, it's probably true in most cases. And so, yeah, the sort of social life is completely knocked out of communities. People don't see each other, talk to each other. It's actually very, very sad, and it leads to a lot more, you know, very sad, lonely people, quite frankly. Look, as far as the drink driving limits are concerned, leave well alone. There is not a problem with this. I know there is the Cromwellian streak of urbanites that run Labour, who just think you just, you know, go by public. If you want to go for a beer, go by public transport. Well, that's fine, you know, if you're living in London or Manchester or Birmingham or Sheffield, but it ain't fine if you're living out in the countryside. And I honestly think changing the level of the drink drive law is, in terms of a list of priorities facing this country, down sort of, well, you know, it's not even in the top 50 issues that need to be dealt with, and it would be a further unnecessary hammer blow to the pubs for almost no benefit whatsoever. I also rather suspect that drug driving is now becoming a much bigger issue in the country than drink driving, where, in the case of 99% of drivers, you know, they do drink and drive responsibly. OK, we've got a few more. Max Young from Guido.
Hi, Max from Guido. Nigel, on pubs, hotels and restaurants are actually worse hit by Labour's business rate tax hikes. Are they going to benefit from the phased removal of business rates that you've got planned here? And one more, Carol Vorderman has called you a grifter and a liar, and she's pledged to enter politics this year. What's your response to that?
I'm looking forward to it. Marvellous. Do you know, people can abuse me all they like. I never, ever bother to return the compliment. I might have teased people over the years for being damp rags, but I've never actually really verbally assaulted or abused anybody. I'm not going to start now. I just, you know, it's sad. But hey, bring it on. Come and stand in Clacton. We will look forward to seeing it. Sorry, first part of your question, I forgot.
Hotels and restaurants.
Oh, yeah. No, read the document. This is for the hospitality industry.
So they're getting business rates
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
It's not just pubs.
Phased transition over time. Look, you know, and to be fair, the other parties have talked about this too. You know, business rates almost take us back to a feudal time. You know, and when you've got all the online retailers and other people not subject to business rates, it genuinely is a tax on the high street. It is closing down pubs, closing down businesses. We have to phase it out and replace it. But it's all there in the document, and the sums are there as well. OK, Aggie Chambra from LBC.
Thank you, Aggie Chambra, LBC. Nigel, can you guarantee that none of your top team are going to be caught up in the Epstein scandal? Have you got those assurances from them? And also, among these files, there are 1,056 documents that name Vladimir Putin, 9,000 that refer to Moscow. Do you think there needs to be an investigation into the link between Jeffrey Epstein and Russia?
I mean, look, I don't know, but I did receive today a message from somebody who used to be in the intelligence community, who did say pretty much exactly what your question's intimating. You know, could that have been the source of the really big money that Epstein had? I don't know. I'm not going to comment either way on that. But should we be looking at it? Absolutely. Well, it does look like this guy was attempting to blackmail as many prominent political and business figures as he possibly could. There's almost no other explanation for why people were being photographed to such a degree. Look, I mentioned 37 times. Nick Candy's exchanged emails with him, trying to sell him apartments or whatever. Beyond that, I'm not aware that anybody in Reform had ever even met Epstein. I might be wrong, but do I think any of the top team, was Lee a regular in New York in those days? I think he was working in the pit, wasn't he? So I don't think Lee's in there. No, I think the answer is no. The answer is no. Nick and I mentioned in both cases many times. Beyond that, I don't think anybody is even mentioned in any way at all. Let's go on to Samara Gill from Talk TV.
Jeremy Clarkson, a pub owner, he wrote a very scathing piece in The Sun this weekend saying that reform sounds great until you ask what they actually do beyond stopping the boats. He also said that voters don't know what they're signing up for. So can you name one policy on health, education or transport that would be measurably better after your first year in power, and tell us how voters would notice the difference?
Hello, Jeremy. Here we are. I'll put a copy in the post to you. I've not been to your pub yet. I trust I'm not banned, along with all the Labour MPs. There you are. There you are. And actually, what he's saying is wrong. Wrong. We've been unveiling new names, new faces. We've been unveiling policies for the last 6 or 8 months, actually in considerable quantity. Now, I mean, of course, the trouble is, he's surrounded, isn't he, by the Chipping Norton set, the sort of Cameron set, and you name it, and no doubt they're feeding this stuff into his ear. Look, he's very, very busy doing his farming and other things. And by the way, I think what he's done for farming is fantastic. I think he's woken the country up to how blooming difficult actually being a farmer is. So I can tell you, Jeremy, there's a constructive plan for pubs that also cuts the welfare bill. I'm sure he will approve thoroughly of that. And you can tell him we're working very, very hard on a proper agricultural policy as well. So I think perhaps he'd be reassured. Just spend less time with David Cameron would be my advice. Nina Lloyd from the Press Association.
Thank you. On the pubs plan, if you won the next election, how quickly would you take this step of cutting VAT for hospitality? Would that be in the first year, in the first budget? And secondly, the leader of the Green Party, Zach Polanski, has said today that he wants a leader-to-leader debate with you. Are you going to take it up on that?
No, I generally find if you pick a fight with a chimney sweep, you get covered in soot. So I might just leave that alone for the moment. And that's the nearest to an insult I'll ever come, all right? But, he's got a fan club, all the heroin smokers and everything. I think he's absolutely marvellous, I mean, jolly good. Look, if the next election doesn't happen until 2029, I mean, goodness knows how many pubs, how many restaurants, how many small B&Bs, hotels would have closed. It could be absolutely terrifying by the time we reach that point. And look, if we get to that point, it'll all be a question of what priorities are. You can't do everything overnight, but you have to try in your first 100 days to do as many practical, straightforward and relatively easy things. And this, of course, would all be lumped in to what would happen in a first budget. So the answer is reasonably, I think sensible answer is reasonably quickly. Will Hazel from the iPaper.
Hello, thank you. Nigel, you said earlier about Peter Mandelson being the best networker in Westminster, having everyone's numbers in his phone. I recall he gave an interview to the FT in which he talked about if he was ambassador, he might use yourself, people like Elon Musk, as a bridge to the Trump administration. Did he ever ask you to brief him on Trump before he went to America, and did you brief him in any way? And on pubs, in terms of reinstating this benefit cap, whatever you think about the cap, these are quite poor families. Do you think it's the right look for reform to be stopping those families from getting additional benefit income to cut the price of a pint?
You can argue, well, it's not just to cut the price of a pint, is it? It's actually to revivify private enterprise, to get more people back in work, whether it's part-time or full-time, and to get the productive part of the economy going, which in turn, of course, leads to people paying more tax. So, yes. And look, we cannot... You can make arguments to give benefits to everybody for everything. But we're in a situation with an exploding, ballooning welfare budget. And I mean, this is one area of it, and obviously the other one is the mental health area, where you can go on benefits for having mild anxiety. I have it every day. I mean, there are things in life we have to cope with. And we're bringing kids up to believe that the normal ups and downs of life are now suddenly terrible traumas. And we're massively overdiagnosing kids with PTSD and many other things. So this is part of that plan. We can't stand aside. We can't stand aside and keep penalising those in work, keep penalising those running businesses or acting as sole traders in favour of, and yes, we're compassionate, but in favour of the non-productive side of the economy. Funny enough, I was at the embassy in Washington the night before Peter Mandelson resigned. So I was just about the last person that saw him before he resigned. That is pure coincidence. I had nothing to do with it whatsoever. No, they never asked for my advice in any way at all. They didn't. And it was even more bizarre, if you go back to November 16, number 10 didn't even have a phone number for Trump. They didn't even know how to contact him. And I'd spent an hour with him, 2 days after he was elected. You would have thought, wouldn't you, that the government at the time would have called me in for a cup of tea and a debrief in the national interest? Nothing like that. But then such is the contempt for me that comes from the British establishment that they don't think there's anything I've got to say that's of any interest at all, even though I would argue, certainly back then, it would have been in the national interest. So no, my help wasn't sought. But I would, as I said earlier, gladly have given it, because it would have been in my national interest. Right, just a couple more. Well, Lucy White from Bloomberg.
Very much. If I could ask about the Steve Bannon messages that we were spoken about earlier. Steve Bannon implies in the messages that you, by being an advisor to you, he might be able to stop the UK publishing any or legislating for any changes in crypto legislation that the US might not want. Why do you think he might have had that impression? And is that why your crypto policy is one of the first things out of the block?
No,
and if
I've been very, I'm sorry, just take that, really important. I've been one of the few public advocates saying, and you can go back and see my public pronouncements on this way back, that cryptocurrency, blockchain is here and it's here to stay. And it will attract a following, especially among the sort of libertarian community. And frankly, since my debanking, I totally and absolutely understand why many people want to have their own control over their own money outside of the main institution. So for a long, long time, I've said that this is something that is here to stay. In Miami now, you can buy everything from a Starbucks coffee to a Ferrari using Bitcoin. The ATMs are now nearly all Bitcoin ATMs in Miami. Believe me, it's coming here. And yes, it's a volatile currency, commodity, asset, call it what you will. It's 33% down right now on what it was about 4.5 months ago. But, buyer beware. It's a big boys' game, big girls' game. And I promise you, it's not disappearing. And there is absolutely no way that Steve Bannon or Elon Musk or anybody has any influence over the decisions I make and the actions I take. I can't be bribed, I can't be bullied, I never have been, I never will be. And I think you'll find that the bust up with Elon Musk this time last year proved that. Second question.
Just ask the second part of the question as well, thank you. The messages that you referred to that include Nick Candy, it appears that Nick Candy had a friendship with Ghislaine Maxwell. Were you aware of that beforehand? Yes. And have you spoken to him since about exactly what shape that friendship involved?
He'd known her for many, many, many years. Many, many, many years. He did say a few things about her. They weren't all necessarily that obliging, but you'll have to ask him yourself. Nick knows everybody. Nick is another great networker, and he's very, very good through his network at selling the most incredibly luxurious and expensive penthouses and properties. That's what Nick does, and he's probably been better at it than anybody else. Two more. Archie Earle from Unheard.
Thank you. Archie Earle, Unheard. Based on what you've seen, Mr. Farage, do you think Peter Mandelson should face prison time? And just on the high-profile Labour defector that you mentioned a couple of weeks ago, do you have any update on that at all?
Work in progress on that. In fact, there are 2 or 3 formerly quite senior Labour figures that we are in negotiations with, and I'm absolutely confident that over the course of the next few weeks we will have some ex-Labour names or Labour names of some substance, maybe even 1 or 2 that want to stand for us coming up before too long. Look, I can't comment on your first question. I'm not a judge. I haven't seen the evidence, but I do think the leaking of market-sensitive information is potentially a criminal offence. And I genuinely ask the question again, and I hope some of you guys pick up on this. I think there are questions to ask under the Official Secrets Act about him telling a foreign national about the security architecture that exists beneath Number 10 and beneath Whitehall. I think there's some very, very serious questions to be asked. Let's end with Dave Burke from the Mirror.
Hi, thank you very much, Mr. Farage. Mr. Anderson, when he was talking about the pub plan, mentioned that you'd crunched all the numbers. Have you done an impact assessment to see how many children you think would be affected by this? And just if I may, to kind of build on what you've said previously, this is the latest instance where you've mentioned restricting benefit access to foreign nationals. If you were Prime Minister and a foreign national happened to lose their job through no fault of their own, if they were made redundant or something, what would your advice to them be?
We'd be compassionate and sensible in every case, but I'd advise you to have a look at the Swedish newspapers today, and you'll find the Swedes are removing indefinite leave to remain. The Swedes are removing automatic right to citizenship after a 5-year period. I think you'll find the Swedes are following pretty much exactly the things that we have been talking about. The impact assessment from where we are today would be 0, because at the moment there is a 2-child cap. There may not be a 2-child cap at some point in the future. The impact assessment change on today would be 0. I see a Guardian hand up over there.
Thank you. I think I got missed off the list because we registered late. So
that's right. You're here now. Ask away.
Like everyone is asking 2 questions, so I'll keep them very quick.
Yeah.
The first one is that Tommy Robinson has endorsed Matthew Goodwin for
Has
the
he?
by-election.
Okay.
And obviously you've many times over the years have distanced yourself, said you want nothing to do with him. As yet, Matt Goodwin hasn't said that. Do you think that he should? And the second one, there's a story in the Sunday Times that a conveyancer called John Richard Simpson has given £200,000 to your party. And he's the head of this little-known interior design firm that's donated 7 other times to the party. Do you know him? He wouldn't tell the Sunday Times what the source of the funds were.
No, he wasn't one of my contacts. No. Most of the donors I know, certainly all of the big donors I know, and you'll be finding out a lot more about that, of course, in a few weeks' time when the Q1 figures are published, and you'll be perhaps quite surprised by what you see. But I didn't know this individual. But I did look at the story, did check it out with our compliance department. Everything's legal, everything's above board. They can speculate about this individual till the cows come home, but it's a legitimate company. He's a perfectly legitimate donor. Look, whoever endorses you, doesn't endorse you, I don't think it really matters, frankly. I don't think, I'm not bothered. Tommy Robinson can do what the hell he likes. It's nothing to do with me, nothing to do with the party. And you'll find, I think we even had an endorsement from somebody known in the adult film industry recently, but we chose not to comment on that, and I'll choose not to comment on this. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, it must be you in France. Yeah. I was better with you. Yeah, maybe the money did get paid. Good to see you.